This is He Who Moans, Doctor Who reviews. I only complain because I like Doctor Who and I care. And I overanalyze too much because, whatever, it's just my opinion. So yes, I have been overly harsh on the Russell era in the past, and while 10 is my least favourite Doctor on the whole, there were more than a fair few bits of genuinely awesome television during his era. Which, yes, I've said in the past, yes, there was lots of stuff that I really liked, as well as stuff that I disliked. When NuWho's good, it can be the best show on television. I've said before, Russell hadn't ruined it, he'd just done something different. Which, of course he would. Classic Who is informed by an entirely different place in culture, and its approach to storytelling is very much of each period. So is NuWho, as approaches to storytelling change all the time, and thus you see why what happened. The primary reason that Russell garnered such an astonishing amount of negative feedback from Classic Who nerds on the internet is because he comes from a completely different world to the show that anoraks like me bang on about. Hence the anti-Russell Brigade build-up that happened on the internet. For the most part, I do see Russell's reasoning behind why he did what he did, and you can't really fault him for succeeding in resurrecting the show. Given the state of its reputation after 15 years off air, that was always going to be a tricky task for anyone that approached it, which I'll give him credit for, and by doing so, he introduced new generations of fans to the franchise. And the demonising of Davies that happened between 2008 and 2010 was founded on quite a lot of what I'll admit is honest-to-God bullshit that came out when the Moffat-Russell divide first surfaced. I mean, I still do have lots of problems with the Davies era, so I wouldn't really call myself on anyone's side here, but loads of people who jump to Moffat's defence when anyone says anything the tiniest bit negative about his show, not to say all, just I heard this one quite a lot when I used to be in Camp Moffat, say that Moffat's Doctor Who is more like Classic Who, so people like me should probably shut up and be sated by this point. But here I present to you, the Doctor and companion land on a spaceship full of humans from a believable future on a mission of scientific investigation and discovery staffed by a slave race of weird-headed squid monsters who get possessed by an alien force, go nuts and try and kill everyone. Gee, that sounds familiar. Yeah, Impossible Planet. It's kind of a base under siege story, guys. An all the trimmings bus story. You weren't paying attention to Day of the Doctor. It has references. That means it's like Classic Who. If you say that, then clearly you weren't paying attention to anything that happened in Russell's era, because as much as I've been critical of a bunch of episodes like End of Time before, if anyone was going to claim that Moffat writes like Classic Who in the new show when stuff blatantly using a Classic Who formula in a 2006 kind of way was staring them in the face all along, yeah, this is the point where I get to wear the tea cosy of smug pretentiousness and say, look, I spotted it all along. So yeah, let's address the Impossible Planet's flaws. Yes, the Ood are basically what you get if you cross the monoids with the Sensorites. The story is based on an endlessly repeated formula that we've all heard before and is nothing new. And yes, it contains the overly emotional bits that I'm known to bitch about, but they're fairly brief and are artistically justified because they relate directly to the events of the plot. I've tried to make it clear before, and noticeably totally failed, much to my detriment in my 10th Doctor retrospective. It's not the element of NuWho being more emotional than Old Who that bugs me. That's not a problem at all, and I do see why it is. I'm not a fucking robot. But as with everything, it all depends on how it's done. When it's done in relation to the story, it can improve the story. When it's overdone and verges into melodramatic, it becomes a key ramp point. It's all about finding that balance between ideas and dramatism, and being overdone, like Russell had a tendency to do, and being underdone, like Moffat did with Season 7. And Impossible Planet had said bits which you'd think that I'd bitch about, but at the same time it kept the plot moving at a good pace, which was why it was such an engaging story to me. It wove them together and had the right balance. This is how you do it.
Amy, you kicked me out!
You want kids, you have always wanted kids! And I can't have them.
This is not how you do it. This is the opposite of how you do it. Impossible Planet's main focus was the relentless horror side of things, because when scary squid-faced things are saying stuff like this,
We are the Legion of the Beast.
You wouldn't exactly stop in that situation to start whining at each other about your breakup. Would you, Moffat? And yes, it did blare out the score far too loudly in some places, but nowhere near as much as other episodes, and I personally think it gets away with it by comparison. For it to have all those points against it and me to still really like this one, it does seem weird, I know, but it was the slow build that made this one kinda gripping to me. A lot of my complaints about NuWho are mostly based on pacing issues and vast tonal shifts. Impossible Planet, however, flowed quite nicely, and yes, I know it's cliched as I say this whenever I talk about an episode of something I like, but everything was there that needed to be there. Not an inch of it was wasted, and everything in it was key to keeping the plot working. We have the brief scaremongering introduction, establish the characters, who are at least all there, and they don't take up too much room in the story, they don't stop the plot dead to start spouting backstory, said backstory is woven into the narrative, and it's shortened to the point.
Mr. Jefferson, tell me, sir, did your wife ever forgive you?
And then we head straight on into the plot, which creeps up on you over the course of the episode. And while it's a bit hammy in parts, the slow creeping build and raising the stakes bit by bit over the course of the episode towards the cliffhanger is done with the kind of skill that we haven't seen for some time now. Build up cliffhanger then resolution next week is what Doctor Who was at heart, and Impossible Planet and Satan Pit managed that really well, and further rams home why I'm really not a fan of the ditching of the two-part stories that's been happening recently. Another thing I really like is how it didn't explain itself in the end. Not because it wanted to just be enigmatic for the sake of it, so it had lines to use in the trailer like End of Time did, or tease the audience about some plot point that would end up disappointing like Moffat does all the fucking time these days. No, Impossible Planet didn't explain itself because it didn't need to. What civilization lived on this planet, what this devil actually is, isn't important. Impossible Planet follows the mantra of, it's space, shit happens. And it leaves it to your imagination to ponder on what could be out there in space, leaving you with a feeling of awe. Strangely, something that has a massive CGI devil on display for all to see is a product of less is more. That's a bloody achievement in and of itself. Hell, Impossible Planet was probably what exacerbated the extreme averse reaction that loads of us took to the next week's episode, Love and Monsters, and that stark contrast pretty much cemented its online reputation. So, yeah, don't misconstrue what I say when I deconstruct how NuWho works and take it to mean that I think that NuWho's totally without its merit. The entire purpose of criticism is just to highlight stuff that we can build on. I am grateful when it does stuff that I really like, and for the most part it happens fairly often.